Hello, my name is Jefferson Richards. It is 2025, October 5th at 2:32 in the morning. I am going to tell my story. So, I was born in Michigan in 2008 when the recession hit. My dad and my sister and I moved to San Diego. I finished high school in San Diego and then went to UC Davis for college. And I went to UC Davis for agriculture. So I worked on the farm in Kentucky with my cousin, James. He tested my gods, and I say that in the plural. I would work on the farm, cut down trees and hunt and fish, pick berries. I'd get off the tractor when the postman came with love letters and would get paid in homemade wine and drink moonshine and write love letters all night. And I got back to UC Davis, and then poetry softened my heart. So it was one poem in particular. It was an elegy by John Donne. I may butcher a couple lines, but it goes, here, take my picture. Though I bid farewell thine, in my heart where my soul dwells shall dwell. 'Tis like me now, but I dead 'twill be more, when we are shadows both, than 'twas before. When weather-beaten I come back, perhaps my hands with rude oars torn or sunbeams tanned, my body sack of bones broken within, and powder's blue stains scattered on my skin. If rival fools tax thee to have loved a man so foul and coarse as though, I may seem then this shall say what I was, and thou shalt say, do his hurts reach me? Doth my worth decay, or should they reach his judging mind that he should now love less what he did love to see? That which in him was fair and delicate was but the milk which in love's nursing state, childish state, did nurse it, whose now is grown strong enough to feed on that which to disused taste seems tough. Poetry softened my heart, and I was talking with my dad, and my dad came to Michigan from Arizona with Ross Perot. He helped introduce object-oriented technology into the automotive industry, and he, DoD, product lifecycle management. He worked on the data science of aircraft carriers and tanks and jets, and part of the reason why I didn't really like to use computers is because I associated it with him on the computer all the time. But he said to me, why don't you use a computer? Why don't you build a poetry database? So I said, all right, I'll do that. So I built a poetry database, and I started to think about it. This was about 2014, 13. I said to myself, well, I would like to type in my poem, and I want my computer to tell me if I sound like a Tennyson or a Yeats or a Shakespeare. So I thought about it from phonetics, the sound of the poem, and I started building a database of phonetics. And then I had a dream where I thought of the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, as being somewhat of like a DNA of human behavior. in the U.S. and shifted over into wanting to apply linguistics and natural language processing to constitutions. And at this point, I was programming on the side. I never looked at my grades when I was at UC Davis. I didn't want to know. And I figured I am just going to drop out. So I left and went back to live with my dad. I thought he was going to have no friends, and then it was just going to be him and I. We'd be codependent. It turns out he had more friends than I've ever had. He had a music jam, James Jam. It was a blues jam. Well, not just that. About 25 to 50 people would come by every other weekend, and I found my voice during that. But in the evening, pretty much all day I'd program natural language processing. So this is about 2015, and I plan on showing it at the end, but I have a website of the history of the content that I wrote. And I bounced my ideas off a buddy, but in between there, how I met that buddy, Neil, how we came together on this project was I went to University of Arizona, and I was living with my cousin, and I started going to linguistics classes. Maybe the teacher didn't know that I was there, but I was walking down the hallway in the linguistics department, and I was talking to somebody there, and I said, "Hey, is there anything hot right now in linguistics?" And I overheard somebody talking about semantic primes. So semantic primes are sort of like the prime numbers of meaning of semantics. It's the natural semantic meta-language, where it's words like you, I, we, is, have, to be, good, bad, big, small, augmenters, like, or often, how many. There's sort of universals to 27 different languages. This was Wiersbecke's and Goddard's work on sort of the universals in language. And I started to think about it, and I said, well, if this is what's universal language, as opposed to prime numbers, where prime numbers, all other numbers can be made up of prime numbers, I thought with semantics, it's the opposite. What's universal to communications can actually be separated, and what's left over is what is unique to the conversation. So I initially was thinking in terms of Zipf's law about basically being able to separate the most universal language into a meaning space, and looking at the movement through meaning space, and then taking what's left over and looking up in Wikipedia, basically. Looking up in an encyclopedia the leftover concepts and subjects. So I started writing this code, and then my buddy Neil called, and he said, "Hey, I graduated from Penn State. What do you got?" And I said, well, I'm looking at these semantic primes. He said, there's some people that are using the computer to read the news so that they can try to predict the stock market and invest in the stock market based on the news and sentiment analysis type of thing. I said, all right, let's do it. So we started a company. I came back from Tucson and went back to San Diego and did the James Jam thing with my dad and wrote, every line by line, and started to learn architecture and software and all that, and develop skills along this 10-year journey of writing natural language processing And I've collected about 5 million articles from the news, and started noticing trends in the news and trends in kind of events. Like we were predicting a coup somewhere in Eastern Europe after Brexit, and then the Turkish coup happened. Neil was much more the sort of hedge fund kind of guy, so he personally was investing, and I was more teeing up the independent evaluations, and we're just close buddies, but developing a common project, because I find that relationships last longer if I have a common project with the person. And I've been friends with Neil for 15 years at this point, 17 years. So I started writing apps and started reading the news in a completely different way and got jaded on it. But really, one, I think, proof of concept in particular that stands out as being important was the GDELT project, which is, and I think the Phoenix project is associated with it. It's a event code analysis that this gentleman did. I actually talked to him on the phone briefly. I called him, and I can show these visuals, but I guess I'll go through it at the end. But basically, what I started to realize was that through this project is that event codes, there's no new news. The news is fit into a finite set of event codes. So, like, there's criteria that make a riot versus a protest. And sort of at the discretion of, publishers of the news. And I started to understand, based on me building robots that scrape the news, and I'm right there in being able to use the event codes that are determined, by the news to trigger trading algorithms. I'm right there, not actually pulling the trigger, but kind of almost forgiving, like Fox News and CNN and all that, kind of somewhat jaded, somewhat nonchalant, but kind of getting to the point where I'm like, we just know English too well. I mean, these event codes that are being spoken by the news are triggering trading algorithms, is what I was assuming was going on. So, but with the natural semantic metalanguage, I was processing the news and studying. This was about 2015, 2016. I was studying Trump's language versus Hillary's language, and basically Trump's was is and have. It was existence-based semantics. So it was X has Y property, or X is X, or X has Y property. Whereas Hillary's was expressions. It was heard, said, felt, saw, think. So that person said this person heard that, they felt that. Whereas Trump was saying is, has, this is this. And I wrote, and I have a document that I put on my website, showing how fake news would shift into it based on who is in power. My hypothesis was that when the pendulum swung from Trump to whoever was next in power that wasn't Trump, or that wasn't, the right wing, that the language would shift from existence-based to expression-based. And I picked on the concept of fake news, which is like an existence kind of thing. It's kind of the truthiness of the news that he was pointing out. Whereas I call the next phase hearsay, where when things are expression-based, it would be, well, that's hearsay. That's hearsay rather than fake news. Specifically, so that if I claim, Jim said this thing that I want to leverage for my aims, if I can then later attack his credibility and say, oh, well, he learned that from the wrong school, or he, or something in his character was what is the word, besmirched, because I decided to pick on some fundamental attribute that I attribute to his character. Then I can say, oh, but I just referenced what he said, and that he said it. I wasn't claiming the truthiness of what he said. Anyway, a little bit abstract. But so I went to the boardwalk in San Diego, and in 3 days I collected 50 emails. And I said, are you talking to fake news? Man, I am too. I'm doing beta testing for a news service, because isn't the Paperboy underrated? And I said, here's a list of keywords that I can filter out the news that I collect and provide it for you. And or you can write down your own keywords right now. And I got 50 emails in 3 days. That shifted my whole gaze in life, and I started to want to provide value as I had to then maintain a 50-person. It ended up being a little bit more than that, but 50-person email service. And then with the GDEL and the event codes, I was extracting out event reports and classifying sort of like, all the event codes are like, hurricane, yielding a position, or the kind of formal event codes. Some of them I don't want to say just because it's like, I don't want to speak in event code on YouTube. So I provided this news service. I decided to go back to school. I wanted to go for something eternal. So I went for mathematics at University of Arizona, partially because I had to take care of family matters in Yuma, and went to University of Arizona. And going to school for mathematics, I kind of put on the shelf the natural language processing for the most part. This is about 2017, 2018. I'd written a couple documents up until then and had a bunch of code. I won't get technical on the architecture, but and in mathematics, I focused on. I'm not really familiar with looking at a camera. I should probably look at the camera. I focused on. So there was sort of a key point. It was like the induction. It was and even probability. I kind of focused on mathematics from a language, kind of event code perspective, and started writing a notation in reading the news from the newspaper. I figured like all this computer stuff, does it really matter if I can't do this by hand? And the whole goal was to kind of come up with a semantic algebra that I could take a newspaper, mark it up, and be able to extract out the event codes and the concepts of subjects, the semantic primes to look at movement through meaning space. And all of that was set against, my physics studies. And so my sister's friend recommended actuarial science. I don't know where it came from. It ended up kind of shifting my gear, and I started an actuarial club, Risk Runners. And part of the original goal with Neil was to basically study, try to predict the stock market from, and he had been teaching me about annual reports, like 10Ks for publicly traded companies. So within this time period, I kind of had robots that would scrape Wikipedia and all that, and I was like, well, why don't, So ended up extracting all the risk factors from publicly traded companies under the notion that I don't need the finances at all. I don't even want to look at the finances. It's kind of how I went through my math degree, was like, mathematics is the easy part if you consider like, it's something like my dad basically taught me. It was always like, a number is kind of, here's the example he always gave, is like, if you slice a log, what is oftentimes forgotten is the width of the blade. You can never have a thin enough blade to cut a log where you have no width of the, like, so that has to be taken into consideration. It's him coming from a background in manufacturing. And along the way, he's teaching me manufacturing, data science. And when I was with him in San Diego before coming to school, I apprenticed with him in product lifecycle management and learned that sort of stuff. But anyway, back to like the mathematics and the language. I figured like I had to kind of finish the deal that I had with Neil, and it was to run the semantic algebra over the risk factors of publicly traded companies. And I created riskrunners.com, and it's a very simple static website that has all the risk factors, kind of extracting all the subjects and concepts. So I started an actuarial club and interned with an actuary in Phoenix and learned about, I implemented a lightweight natural language processing. This is about 2019 or 18. Where it was a very lightweight, same concept, event codes. So we looked at like hotel, motel, business rules, which were like, let's say that the hotel does not have insurance coverage for drinking alcohol on premises and getting hurt or something like that. Like, they're not indemnified is what it's called. It's where you're covered. They're not indemnified for alcohol. So I did a simple proof of concept. I said, let's scrape their social media, their Yelp, and they're already insured, so they've freed up their data to be looked at. And if somebody said, "Hey, I had a great mimosa at this hotel," then it would send a notification to the underwriters to go talk to them. And I had a qualm about this for a long time until a mentor talked to me. He was like, "What? You'd much rather the underwriter know before the lawyer. Like, it's great that they got to make that the hotel got to find out that they weren't being covered for something that their clients were doing, which was drinking, that they may not have even had known about." So then it was basically bridge the gap of coverage if they didn't have it. So we never implemented it fully. I was R&D. I kind of turned in the R&D at the same time as turning in my project proposal. So finished the internship and graduated from college and to basically December 2019, and then COVID hit, and then I just used the shower, after I went to the restroom. Like, I didn't need toilet paper, like, whatever it is. And a buddy called me from UC Davis and said, and I think I was talking to him, and I said, "Hey, I need work." Within like 3 months, I got work at a CPG analytics company, a startup, and it was, this is just one sideline thing. I think it's important. I was at $0 in my bank account, and up till like 3 days before my rent being due, and I got paid for this gig. I sort of consulted And then the owner said, "Oh, why don't you like help us implement what you consulted?" And it's just one of those things that like all of the natural language processing work, like I'm not trying to emphasize this as being like, although I might have, stated this kind of thing, I'm not trying to emphasize this as being like an alternative to AI of what we now know it to be, like language learning models, large language models, whatever they're called. Although this is kind of like a semantic algebra, it's kind of like taking the derivative of y equals mx plus b compared to like millions of nodes. This is like an algebra on the language itself. It's not perfect. I'm not claiming that. I need help on it. I need help. It was me with 10 fingers, figuring this out line by line, compared to the hundreds of thousands of fingers that are working on the LLMs. Like, it was like I was the stable boy, like, shoveling hay, and then, ChatGPT came in as a knight and just kicked me into the hay, and I went back, and he just gallivanted on. It was like, I was on a homemade sailboat in the middle of the ocean, high noon, no wind, and I'm like, I'm on this ship, like I'm staying on this natural language processing mind tool cortex, and like everyone around me is on yachts, going every which way direction on yachts, going, I'm going in the right direction, and I'm like, what do I do? And my buddies are like, study the greats. Like, what else can you do? Like, you don't have a wind behind your sail. So at first, it was a bit of like I realized Cortex was a bit of a golden cow for me, in the sense of it being the rudder in the water. It kept me from excessively going out. I mean, I kept up karaoke, I kept up poetry, I kept up socializing and pool parties and barbecuing for the girls and all that sort of thing. But it was then the philosophy club. I had epicideas.club is where I like recorded a lot of our kind of philosophy club and stuff like that. But anyway, with respect to natural language processing and AI, I closed the loop and finished the architecture. And, it ended up taking about 10 years in total. But I finished the architecture. And along the way, I had developed a lot of allegories about sort of where I saw things going from an actuarial perspective. You can look it up on the website. But I'm not trying to emphasize dystopic stuff. But I think that's about it. So I can show my website. Maybe I'll think of some other things, but let me see if I can. Okay, there we go. So Jefferson.cloud is the key thing. My writings, music, whatever. This is kind of the social part of my writing, and then what I call decoding, kind of trying to decode things, is Richards.systems, and then the wiki is the history from 2014 of natural language processing. I think a good starting point with any of this content is really just the allegories, like they're tangible stories. Like I'll give you an example of the most recent one that I wrote. That I think about these and go test it out when I go to the bar, when I go, dropping bits with my buddies and stuff, and test it out and then kind of work on them That's what I think, like, that's what I'm calling these allegories. But caveman fashion. Jim and Bob are sitting on a park bench watching folk walk by. Bob says, "Hey, Jim, these yoga pants are caveman fashion." Jim says, "I'm not complaining. Bob, I mean, the price point is getting down for these materials, but there should be cuts and flair." Jim thinks and says, "You know, we wouldn't have this bench to sit on without these women in athleisure and glasses." Bob, how do you mean? Jim, they're voting on where they want to see guys like us install these benches. They put up a heart hand, and if the recording office gets enough pings, they install a bench. Bob thinks and says, "I'd like that for potholes on my street." Jim, that just takes kind of another hand sign for money. And caveman fashion. It's a I already lost that typo. Whatever. I lost the typo. So there's plenty of content here, and it gets into some of the newer stuff. And then finally is my consulting work. So, you know, the solutions, I sort of documented everything in mind maps to show kind of everything that was involved in the work that, you know, this is all passion project things and a sort of narrative or Holy Spirit, if you will, of like, wait, why did I pursue that? And it's, I don't want to be a Nimrod here. Like, it's not, this is not due to solely my character or even me meeting the economy halfway. It's like the good Lord opened up some serious doors, and the skills along the way were helpful. And there's kind of a key now pivot point with our I think is critical to emphasize in this video, and then I'll wrap it up, which is let's see if I have the integral mass. So this is sort of the next phase, which is wrapping this all up, closing the circle in the long run with my dad, in the sense of you know, we are very close. There's no problem. It's more of the sense of my duty to, because of the brain drain that happened from outsourcing manufacturing. So the objective of IMAS is to understand PLM, ERP, MRP, CRM, and AI to play a part in resolving the productivity paradox. Well, why is this relevant? So the productivity paradox, you can see the computer age everywhere but in productivity statistics. I mean, this bubble, if you might call it that, some hedge funds are going to get caught up in the bubble, some are going to actually invest in manufacturing. You know, the power per capita of CNC machinists is now worthy of hedge funds. This is the notice. And sort of like old money is in real estate, you know, hedge funds, and then new money is in AI that might get caught in the bubble. Sort of the ones that are established and have already gone through the iterations of investing in the startups. The sort of social media plus Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like social media plus sex plus food plus transportation in an app, right? Startups always have the same kind of thing for the last 10 years. And the hedge funds that have already gone through that are going to be able to shift into manufacturing. And so I got, you know, plenty of content here to talk about manufacturing and all of that, but I want to focus on one last piece of this, which is the family resource management. And this is kind of my emphasis on repurposing CRM for what I call family RM. You know, at the root, we have food and health and working with our hands and mathematics and thinking and, you know, academics, if you want to call it that, but really common sense, I think is a better way to say it. The next layer up, which has a firewall between it, is your propaganda, your mythology, your value system, and I'm not saying these are all equal by any means, but however you align in that calculus of value for your decentralized community, your value system, and then a firewall between that, and then we get to the layer of Salesforce, eHarmony, Ancestry, and Google Suite. Imagine integrations between these and even 23andMe, if that was still a company. Like, that sort of integration will change things dramatically in combination with then the devices, including glasses, right? Imagine a red light, green light, yellow light. If somebody, forgive me for using such a crude example, but it's like, imagine fucking red light because somebody might have sickle cell anemia. So then it's like the Ancestry and the eHarmony and your glasses are saying, oh, don't talk to that person because it's discretionary. Social media is a discretion. Like, we're going to do it to ourselves. We're going to put fucking our DNA onto social media and be like, I'm not going to hide. Like, so, and then the credit card being tied to that. So anyway, Family RM, and then here's an example of using like a CRM for like family and management, right? Buy a car, teeth aligners, Patron Smarts, home videos, like it's just repurposing that for more universal family RM stuff. So that's about it. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. I appreciate your time. I sort of was going over the narrative. It's 3:10 in the morning. Like, it's sort of a smoking day, as Khalil Gibran might say. But I'll finish it with a quote from Khalil Gibran. I don't have it exactly right, but he basically said, "Friends grieve not when they depart from each other, as the climber appreciates the mountain from the plain."